Senator from Washington.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Madam President, before I begin, I want to just take a moment to address something that's really been on the hearts and minds of those back home in my home state of Washington. On Saturday, as I'm sure many of you heard, the town of Oso, Washington, a small, tightly knit town alongside the Stillaguamish River, was directly hit by a massive landslide. That landslide cut off the town of Darrington, which is just a few miles up State Road 530, and houses over a square mile were just simply swept away. Already we know we've lost several people, and yesterday we learned that there could be well more than 100 that are still missing. So, Madam President, right now in Washington State, there are dozens of families who just simply don't know if their loved ones are even still alive. And even though Oso and Darrington are 2,300 miles away from the nation's capital, our hearts and prayers are with them and their families in that community. And I want them to know that in the coming days and weeks and months and even years, if that's what it takes, all of us will stand with the people of Oso and Darrington and provide any resources they need to recover and rebuild, and that they have the thoughts and prayers of everyone in this country from the real Washington to this one. With that, Madam President, let me change gears a bit and address one of the most significant pieces of legislation for women in my lifetime, the Affordable Care Act. On Sunday, Madam President, this law celebrated its 4th anniversary, serving as a very stark reminder of where our nation's healthcare system was just 4 years ago. 4 years ago, our health insurance companies could deny women care due to so-called pre-existing conditions, like pregnancy or being a victim of domestic violence. 4 years ago, women were permitted to be legally discriminated against when it came to insurance premiums, and often were paying more for coverage than men. 4 years ago, women did not have access to the full range of recommended preventive care, like mammograms or prenatal screenings and much more. 4 years ago, insurance companies had all the leverage and all the power, and too often it was women who paid the price. Well, now, thanks to that Affordable Care Act, for the first time, women, not their insurance companies or their employers, are now fully in charge of their own health care. In fact, women make up over half of the 5 million people that have already signed up for coverage in the new marketplace. And over 47 million women have already gained guaranteed access to preventive health services thanks to that Affordable Care Act. That is why I feel so strongly we cannot go back to the way things were. And while we can never stop working to make improvements, we owe it to the women of America to make progress and to move forward and not allow the clock to be rolled back on their health care needs. Unfortunately, there are efforts underway all across the country, including here today in our nation's capital, to severely undermine a woman's access to some of those most critical and life-saving services that were provided under the Affordable Care Act. And no provision of this law has faced quite as many attacks as the idea of providing affordable, quality, reproductive health services to the women of America. For this reason, I was very proud to lead members of my caucus in filing an amicus brief with the Supreme Court in the 2 cases that are being considered there today. Those cases were brought by CEOs who want to take away their employees' right to insurance coverage for birth control, which is guaranteed under the Affordable Care Act. And just like the many attempts before this case, there are those out there who would like the American public to believe that this conversation is anything but an attack on women's health care. To them, it's a debate about freedom, well, except of course when the freedom comes for women to access care. It's no different than we are told that attacks on abortion rights somehow aren't an infringement on a woman's right to choose, that they're somehow about religion or states' rights. Or when we're told that restricting emergency contraception isn't about limiting women's ability to make our own family planning decisions, it's somehow about protecting pharmacists. Or, just like last week, when an Alaska state senator proposed placing state-funded pregnancy tests in bars, but ruled out providing contraception because, and I quote, birth control is for people who don't necessarily want to act responsibly. Well, Madam President, the truth is this is about contraception. This is an attempt to limit a woman's ability to access care, and this is about women. Allowing a woman's boss to call the shots about her access to birth control should be inconceivable to all Americans in this day and age, and it takes us back to a place in history when women had no voice and no choice. In fact, contraception was included as a required preventive service in the Affordable Care Act on the recommendation of the independent nonprofit Institute of Medicine and other medical experts because it is essential to the health of women and families. And after many years of research, we know ensuring access to effective birth control has a direct impact on improving the lives of women and families in America. We have been able to directly link it to declines in maternal and infant mortality, reduced risk of ovarian cancer, better overall healthcare outcomes for women, and far fewer unintended pregnancies and abortions, which is a goal we all share. What's at stake in this case before the Supreme Court is whether a CEO's personal beliefs can trump a woman's right to access free or low-cost contraception under the Affordable Care Act. Madam President, I strongly believe every American deserves to have access to high-quality health care coverage regardless of where they work or where they live. And each of us should have the right to make our own medical and religious decisions without being dictated to or limited by our employers. Contraceptive coverage is supported by the vast majority of Americans who understand how important it is for women and families. In weighing this case, my hope is the court realizes that women working for private companies should be afforded the same access to medical care regardless of who signs their paycheck. We can't allow for-profit, secular corporations or their shareholders to deny female employees access to comprehensive women's health care under the guise of a religious exemption. It's as if we're saying that because you are a CEO or a shareholder in a corporation, your rights are more important than your employees who happen to be women. And as I sat inside that Supreme Court chambers this morning, listening to the arguments being made on both sides, I couldn't help but think, if these CEOs are allowed to evade this law, what would happen to the other legal protections for employees? Could your boss decide not to cover HIV treatment? Could an employer opt out of having to comply with anti-discrimination laws? Corporations should not be able to use religion as a license to discriminate. Madam President, I'm proud to be joined in filing the brief by 18 other senators who were in office when Congress enacted the religious protections through the Religious Freedom Restoration Act way back in 1993, when we made when we made access to women's health care available through the Affordable Care Act in 2010. We are senators who know that Congress did not intend for a corporation or its shareholders to restrict a woman's access to preventive health care, because we all know that improving access to birth control is good health policy and good economic policy. We know it will mean healthier women, healthier children, healthier families, and a healthier America. And we all know it will save money for businesses and consumers. But Madam President, I know many of our colleagues believe that repealing the Affordable Care Act and access to reproductive health services is somehow a political winner for them. But the truth is, this law and these provisions are a winner for women, for men, for children, and for our health care system overall. So I'm very proud to stand with my colleagues who are committed to making sure the benefits of this law do not get taken away from the women of America. because politics and ideology should not matter when it comes to making sure women get the care they need at a cost that they can afford. So thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.